Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Please visit iTunes, Stitcher, or emmettmuckles.com to listen to all the episodes for free.
Ladies and gentlemen, today my guest is Jeff Raisley. He is the author of Godless, Living a Valuable Life Beyond Belief, and he's authored quite a few other books as well, all stemming from a trip to Nepal. Stay tuned. We have a fun-filled, packed, information-laden episode for you. Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast. Today, I have a Nepali trekker with me, and I'd like to welcome Jeff to my podcast. How you doing today, Jeff?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me, Emmett.
No problem. It seems we've gotten all the technical difficulties worked out today, so everything's going to be beautiful from here on out.
Terrific.
So you had a change of course. You were running a law practice and you decided to say, I need to go somewhere else. My life is telling me there's something else available for me to experience. What was that journey like for you?
Well, the journey that you're talking about, that when I went off to Nepal for the first time, started when I came home from the office one day, and life was busy, stressful, being the senior partner in a law firm, raising two kids, all the stuff that goes with having your own business. And my wife had detected this and what we called a midlife crisis. And she tossed a brochure down in front of me about trekking in the Nepal Himalayas and said, why don't you go do this? So she was saying, hey, buddy, why don't you go take a hike and do it on the other side of the world? And that is how my first journey to Nepal started.
When you got there, what was your expectation? Was it just, I need to get away from where I am and move to something different, or just have a different experience so I can reset and come back and do it again? Or were you just saying, I'm just going to be open and go on a path that I'm not sure what will be waiting for me?
I think it was all of those. I mean, the immediate motivation was the sense of life just seems, even though very full, somehow felt unfulfilled. Like, the old question, is this all there is? And feeling like the answer wasn't adequate in the way life was. But on the other hand, a guy I met on the way over who is from Nepal gave me some good advice, which was, he said, when you get to Nepal, expect the unexpected, because it's very different from anything you've experienced. And he was right. And so I tried to take the attitude of being open, being curious, and I was well rewarded for it.
How about the altitude, first of all? Were you used to that one?
No. I've lived at sea level all my life. I was not a mountain climber, had really no experience with mountains other than driving across the Rockies to get to California a few times. But no, I wasn't. And I did have a touch of altitude sickness at one point on that first trek.
Ooh, what was that like? You're in a new environment and then you get ill. How did that affect you? Because I experienced something similar to like one of the first times I went to Denver. I was like, and I was there to speak. And all of a sudden, every 30 seconds, I had to take a minute of breaths.
Yeah, it feels like your lungs just won't fill. But the way it happened that first time, and I've actually had much more severe altitude sickness on subsequent mountain climbs, but we had reached the end point of where our group was going to trek, and we were on the Mount Everest Base Camp trail. And our guide young American guy. We had two guides, a local Nepali guide, a Sherpa guy, and an American guide. And he said, to those of you that want to, and there were actually three of us in the group that were the strongest hikers, he said, if you want, we're going to hike as hard and fast as we can, and we'll get up to base camp today, and we'll get back to our campsite tonight, but we're going to have to go hard and fast. And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but what it meant was a lot harder and faster than what I was prepared for. And by the time I was getting back to my tent, getting up this last rise to our campsite, I was literally picking my legs up with my hands to lift them because they were shot. There was nothing left. And that night in the tent, I felt the typical symptoms of altitude sickness, which starts out with a headache, then dizziness, then nausea, and then a loss of muscle control. And I didn't get to that last stage, thankfully, but I did not want to get out of that tent in the morning.
I bet.
It was worse than a hangover.
Oh. That's a Midwest. Well, that's my Midwest thing, and I've gotten too old to partake like I used to. So now I just, sip water so I can stay hydrated. But I know exactly what you mean by when the body just can't get enough oxygen, it's going to let you know. How did that translate or transpire into you writing books? Or was that something that was on your list of things in life to do, or was it inspired somehow?
Yeah, going to Nepal really just came out of that suggestion from my wife. I had loved to travel from the time I was a kid. When I was 18, after one semester of college, I dropped out, walked to the edge of my hometown, Goshen, Indiana, not far from Valpo, stuck my thumb out and hitchhiked across the country. And when I was 19, I took a motorcycle trip from Indiana all the way down to Mexico City, all through the Midwest, South, through Mexico. So I had the travel bug, and that was part of what my wife recognized, is that bug was not getting fed. And she realized I needed to feed it again. And so that's what helped set me off. But I had no intention of using this as a springboard for writing, but it turned into one, because I came back and I wrote an article about that experience, and it was published, and several followed, and eventually a book.
That you just said something that was really awesome, and I can identify with it as well, because I have a travel bug too. Mine is much shorter than yours. I have about 90 days, and then I need to leave where I am for a short period of time. And not many people can recognize that in their partners. So you have a very great compliment in your life for somebody who can understand your needs. Now, it wasn't the fact that you just wrote one book. You wrote a series of books, and were they all stemming from one experience, or was it subsequent experiences that you pulled the information from there?
Yeah, the first book, the first full book, was about an extraordinary experience I had connecting with a particular remote village in Nepal, which has led to me creating a foundation to help finance infrastructure like schools and water projects, electrical projects, so forth in this remote area of Nepal. And so that book, when I finished it, I kind of thought, well, I did what I wanted to do. I told the story of how I connected with this village and what I gained from this connection for myself, and also how I developed this mutually helpful relationship with this village, because I've been back 5 times since then. And that's it. That was what I intended to do, but then that book led to speaking engagements and follow-up articles, and eventually another book, and then another book. And so I've written 3 books that are about my experiences, adventures, and crazy, wild, weird people I've met in Nepal.
Well, did that start off with Bringing Progress to Paradise? Was that the first book?
Yes.
And then from there, you have some other books referring to like some pilgrimages that you've taken. For instance, the Sturgis book.
Yeah.
And did you get bitten by the bug after you got the first one done? And then you said, I'm just going to chronicle it all.
Yes, I'm just turning my life into a series of books. Who needs to live anymore? Just write about, make it up and write it. But yeah, I mean, I always loved writing. I've been around writers all my life. My mom was a journalist and an editor of our local newspaper, and my grandfather was too. She followed in his footsteps. And my wife is a writer. She had her first book published when she was just 21, and she's an English professor. So I'm kind of lived a life around the written word. And after I quit practicing law, it opened up, so much more time for me that was another bug I could feed, feed the need to write as well as to travel, and which gave me more to write about.
So where did the motivation for Monsters of the Midway come from?
Well, I went to the University of Chicago, and Chicago, in the early part of the 20th century, and starting in the 1890s, was one of the dominant football programs in the country. Monsters of the Midway. Amos Alonzo Stagg was the winningest coach in college football history until Bear Bryant broke his record in the 1980s. But in 1939, the school dropped out of the Big Ten, dropped football, and did not have a football team for 30 years. And in 1969, the school started varsity football again. And I joined the team in 74, so 5 years after varsity football had been resurrected. And I played for 2 years. And when you start a football program, it's usually kind of it's like trekking up a long, high mountain. It takes a while to get to the point where you're winning games. And when I was on the team, the year before, they'd not won a game. My first year in 74, we did not win a game. We won the very last game that I played in 1975, which was also the very last game the coach, Wally Hass was his name, who started up football again and had devoted decades of his life to resurrecting football. And it made his 100th victory as a college football coach. So, and People magazine wrote an article about our team in 74 and called us the worst team in college ball. They didn't even restrict it to the worst team in college football. They said college ball. But there were fascinating characters on this team, and the coaches were an interesting collection of characters too, one of whom had been the coach at Joliet State Prison, went from coaching hard-bitten cons to coaching scholar athletes at this elite university. But anyway, it was a wild, interesting experience, and I'd written an article about it years ago, which was published in Chicago Magazine, and I wanted to expand that into a book. And so what I did is, instead of just writing a straight history, I sprinkled in the history with a novel. And so I romanticized, fictionalized my own experience and combined it with the history going way back into the 1890s.
Wow, because I was looking at the title and I was trying to figure it out. I've seen quite a bit of your books, But that one stuck out because I was like, that wasn't in the forefront, but it said, Monsters of the Midway, 1969, sex, drugs, rock and roll, Vietnam, civil rights, and football. I'm like, that's a lot of things to cover, under one umbrella. But I suppose you can because you got sports, people, and you got machismo all in the same book.
That's right. And in 69, Vietnam War, student protests, civil rights movement, the draft being resumed. It was a crazy time. And although I was only in high school at that time, I watched it. And so then I interviewed guys who had been on that first 1969 team and then having played in the mid-70s myself, whereas the echoes of all that were still pretty loud and affected everybody on the team. Like, kids started college thinking they had the student deferment. Well, the student deferment ended in 1970, and so now all these kids are subject to the draft, which kind of changes your attitude towards life and to college and to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Life just kind of sped up for those few years.
I bet you're just like, well, you never. Tomorrow's definitely not promised now, so we might as well live it now.
Yeah.
You came out with a book, Godless: Living a Valuable Life Beyond Belief. Now, one thing about the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast, that's kind of the focus. I recently changed the theme of it to, basically finding your Trinity, and which is, connecting your mind, body, and spirit versus chasing dollars, because at the end of the journey, you can't really take them with you. And if all you've done is just chase money, that wasn't really a life. So what brought about that particular book and said, this has to be done?
I'm glad you asked that because I, of course, checked out your podcast and, saw your own interest in how I think we really connect on this point. This will be a bit of a long answer.
I do this for you guys. I don't do it I do it for me. I have a kind of a selfish interest because I literally want to be in conversation with people like yourself. You guys are my teachers. And if I'm just doing it my own way, I'm only looking at the world through my eyes. So I get to see it from your experiences as well.
Well, so when I went to Nepal and I got to know the culture and a lot of individuals and villages in the high mountains of the Himalayas, I discovered an attitude towards life and community that so many Americans have forgotten or left behind, and which is in a short term putting the community before the individual. And one of the great values of America is individualism, self-reliance. Those are great values. But sometimes those values can be lived out at the expense of neighborhoods, communities, even family, where it's so much about us as opposed to our family, our community, our country even. And in the high mountain villages, the individual is almost insignificant. Like in the Sherpa people, every Sherpa's last name is Sherpa. The Rai people, which is another mountain people, every Rai member of the Rai tribe is Rai. My best friends in Basa village are Niru Rai, Ganas Rai, Sangha Rai. That sort of indicates how their tribe is so much a fundamental aspect of themselves. So as I spent a lot of time with these folks, and it put America, modern America, in a critical light in our really, we're kind of in an age of narcissism. and it really shone this light for me on that, and on myself too, admittedly. And so I began, thinking about how their values were different than ours, even though we use a lot of the same language when we talk about values that they do, because we talk about how family is so important, and neighborhoods and so forth, but we don't live it in the depth that they do. And so I then began to try to refashion my own life somewhat. I left the Presbyterian Church, which was my lifelong church and many generations going back in my family, and joined up with the Quakers. And I did that intentionally because one of the similarities between the Quakers and the Rai people of Nepal is that they see, as they would say it, God in everyone. Everyone has a divine spark or a divine spirit. And the Quakers end it with human beings. The Rai people take it on steroids and say, the God is in everything. Everything, even this table, this microphone, everything that exists has a divine spirit in it. It's alive in some fundamental sense. And because of that, we have to respect everything, and particularly the environment. And these people who didn't even have a school, who were uneducated by our standards, have this wonderful environmental consciousness, as well as this incredible friendliness, caring towards other human beings. If you come to their village, you're not a stranger, you're an honored guest, and they will provide you shelter, they will feed you, and they expect nothing in return, because that's their values. That's the way they see how people should be. And so, although I don't know whether God is in everything or not, and in fact the title of that book is Godless, what I wanted to do in that book is to show how if we got rid of all of our competing ideologies, particularly political and religious ones, and just drop down to what are our fundamental shared values, like kindness, respect, tolerance, and most fundamentally, love of neighbor and love of the natural world, life would be so much better. And in this last political campaign, I think it really shows how ugly life gets when we see everything as competition as opposed to cooperation. And so anyway, that, like I said, that's a long answer.
No, that's fine, because part of the mantra of the billionaire lifestyle is, first I had to figure out some things. And one of the things that a friend of mine said, I was talking about direction, how I wanted to go. And then in our conversation, she made me recognize it was my ego that was pushing it. And she did it in a very simple way. She said, why don't you just keep doing what you're doing, because it will tell you where it's going to go. And that's kind of one of those things with our lives and competition. And there's another thing that I can kind of tie into, kind of regressing your ego. My wife is Austrian, and a couple times over a 5-year period, we'll go to Austria. And I'm very noticeable in Austria. But
how is that?
But there's one thing that I have noticed. They don't have some of the social hang-ups that we experience here. And then I realized why, because it's kind of a monosyllabic kind of society where everybody's kind of the same. So the only thing that they have that are different is political views and religion. So that's the only thing that, I've really heard in conversation where people had a tiff about something, and that's basically an opinion. They're just having tests over differences of opinion. We're here, we just find everything we can to segregate and put ourselves in the group. Well, you're not in my group, but you're in that group, and that group's not a part of the group that I was in last week. So there's a bunch of things that I found out is similar to you once I've traveled outside the country, that we are far more the same than we are different. It's just that these constructs have kind of molded us into their way of thinking.
Yeah, and when you talk to people on a very personal level about, what do you care about? What do you really care about? Whether you're a villager in the Nepal Himalayas or you're a guy in Valparaiso, Indiana, most of us will say things like, well, I care about my family. I want to have a good life. I want to be healthy. And that's because I've had these kind of conversations, which are reflected in that book, all over the world. I've been to over 40 countries. And when you say, we're really fundamentally more alike than we're different, it's really true. I mean, as we know, our DNA with those millions of protein and molecules and cells that make us up, we're 99.9% the same, every one of us. Yeah. And that on the biological level. But on the psychological level, the same is true. That what the vast majority of people really care about is the same thing. They want to have a good life. They want their family to have a good life. They want to live in a neighborhood that's safe, in a community that's a warm, welcoming place. We're all the same in that way. And all this competitiveness and the seeing the world as a zero-sum game where what life should be about is getting as much as I can, and the success is burying me with as many things as I can possibly accumulate in life. It doesn't lead to a happy or a good existence.
I have to ask you about an experience that you may have encountered when you were high up in the mountains, because I've experienced this from a lower level, which is, picture this, stay with me here. You're in the Himalayas, there's not a cloud in the sky, and it's pitch black. You raise your head and you look up at the sky, and that vision, because you don't have light pollution, you don't have the pollution of the mind, what did you experience?
Well, at night, and usually when you're at altitude, at night, it's rare to see a cloud. And so that the stars are so bright and so numerous, it looks like you can touch them. I mean, you can see the Milky Way so clearly. And just that, the physical vision is so awesome. It's almost overwhelming when you first experience it. And so the reaction to that on a psychological level, I think for most people is a cleansing experience. You feel just washed clean of anxiety, stress, tension, which so much of that comes from this sense of trying to win in life and, competing to get more. And, you can have that experience in all sorts of different ways. Go out and, run 2 miles hard. That's a cleansing experience. And that sense of, well, it may be just a painful
Not anymore for me. My knees can't take it.
Yeah, well, you're right. Me too. Bad example. But anyway, that's what I get out of that scenario that you describe.
Yeah, because I had a similar experience. It was literally on my bucket list. I'm a guy who was born in Detroit, Michigan, spent most of my life in the city. And when I did travel, I traveled to another major city. So me seeing the majority of the stars, the only time I can recount was when I was a kid and we would travel from Detroit to Memphis, Tennessee, and we would get those roads, those county roads where it was no clouds. But it's still not the same until I experienced it at a higher altitude, and also I went to a black area in the United States in the Arizona desert. At that point, it will make you shed a lot of things and go, you know, some of the stuff I think is important just isn't that important.
Indeed.
Well, we're at the 30-minute mark, and I try to keep these relatively short. Sometimes they go 2 and 3 times as long. But I really wanted to touch base with you because of the experience that you had, the experience you could share, and that very last segment that we talked about where, you know, we need to drop some things. We need to shed some things or control our ego and find out that we are drops that accumulate an ocean, which means we're one in the scheme of things. So I want to thank you. Now let's go through your books. The most if you could pick one of your books and say this is what my message is, which one would that be?
It would be Godless: Living a Valuable Life Beyond Beliefs, and the reason is it lays out my own journey in terms of trying to figure out what is really valuable in life and how to live a values-based life as opposed to trying to live according to some philosophy or doctrine or ideology, and stripping away all of those things that are layered on us with good intention, usually through education and Sunday school and church and political indoctrination and so forth. Strip all that away. What do we really care about? And if we focus on that, then what kind of relationships does that lead to?
Now, where can people find your works?
Well, any bookstore can order any of the books if they're not carried. Of course, everything is available on Amazon now. So you can go to Amazon and put in my name or the title of any book. I also have a website that has all the books on it, and that's my full name, Jeffrey Raisley, JEFFREYRASLEY.com. And that also has information about trekking in Nepal and photographs and descriptions of mountaineering expeditions I've done.
You know, I was so comfortable with you, I never said your last name. Hey,
it's an odd last name anyway. So
now, what about Twitter? And do you speak? Do you have local appearances, national appearances, or things that you are kind of involved with that are on a reoccurring basis?
Not really. I've spoken locally in Indianapolis and in Chicago to all sorts of different civic groups, church groups, Kiwanis, Rotary, clubs like that, book groups, library groups. So if somebody knows about me, reads one of my books, and they ask me to speak, I'm happy to do it. And I love telling people about the Bassa Village Foundation, which is the foundation that I started to help develop infrastructure in this remote area of Nepal. But I'm not on any sort of speaking circuit or speakers bureau.
Well, you and I are going to have to speak about that because I'm heavily involved in solar. Heavily involved.
And solar meaning our solar system?
No, I mean like solar energy.
Okay.
Photovoltaic energy.
Well, something that's kind of interesting is some third world countries, Nepal included, are almost skipping over the whole coal, gas, that industrialized form of energy to hydroelectric and solar.
Yeah.
I mean, you go out in these remote villages in Nepal and you see solar panels because it's cheaper now.
Yeah, it's much cheaper.
It's less expensive. I mean, what, you're going to haul gasoline or coal up a 12,000 foot high mountain? No, but haul a solar panel? Yeah.
And the battery technology is coming leaps and bounds too. Well, Jeff, it was awesome having you here. I thank you so much for being a part of the show. And ladies and gentlemen, remember this. As you're looking in my face, if you're looking at this on video, which you're probably not, you're probably listening to the audio, but still you'll get the picture. You're going to look in a mirror and you're going to look at yourself. And I want you to look at every little detail. You may not even be comfortable with those, but I want you to get comfortable. I want you to get comfortable with the cracks, with the moles, with the little wrinkles that you have, with the little difference, how one eye might be higher than the other. We all have it. But know that you are a miracle. Know that you are 1 in a billion, which means you have the right to live the billionaire lifestyle, which is your lifestyle. So you must love yourself first. When you love yourself, that love is contagious. It will be pandemic. And then that will be the tipping point for us to start our new utopia. With that, thank you so much and go live the billionaire lifestyle. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Emmett.